Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our next episode of Mixed Messages with Jeff Bogue. My name is Joe Caruso, and I'll be your host as we dig into today's topic. From news sources to comedians, friends to advertisements, it seems everyone has an idea of how we should think, live, and make decisions, and Jeff's trying to pull my flip-flop off. That's awkward. But when everyone disagrees, how do we cut through the noise? How do we sift through all that information overload and choose what governs our lives? Well, as we pray and process these things, we want to offer a resource to navigate some of the day's most pressing topics and questions. Leave the shoes alone, man.
Yet you're sitting here with your big fat toe in my
By your
view,
knee, in your view.
and I'm the one who's awkward for trying to grab your flip-flop.
You know, it was your example years and years ago of wearing flip-flops around all the time, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not sitting awkwardly at all. Oh, my goodness. Well, today, Jeff, we have a question coming in from one of our listeners, and they actually start with a really nice comment, and I appreciate that. They say, I just wanted to thank you for the content you put on this podcast. I don't come from a family of believers and have felt lost when needing godly advice or clarity. And this podcast has really helped me in that area by both Pastors Jeff and Joe's wisdom on the mixed messages we see in the world. Your topics have addressed some really hard questions, and I didn't even know I had questions I didn't even know I had in a really clear and loving way. And so I just appreciate that. I think in so many ways, Jeff, that answers our prayers.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why we started this, to hopefully be that resource, like we say in our intro every week. But thank you for letting us know that and seeing fruit in this ministry. Her question comes along this way, Jeff. My husband and I are in our 20s with a toddler and one on the way, and doing our best to create a home that is centered around Christ. We're very involved in our church, but are struggling with whether we should stay or find a new church. We don't want to be consumer-minded. However, we are asked a lot without any sort of discipleship, which we have asked for. So how do you decide when and if it's time to leave a church? And if you do decide to leave, how do you do that in a loving way?
Boy, that's a big question and a tough one. And so, first of all, congratulations on the baby on the way. There is the number one joy, earthly joy of my life, hands down, bar none, is being a dad. And so
mine's working with you, but I suppose fatherhood's good too.
I just love being a dad. So congratulations. That's fantastic. You know, that it's a very difficult question. And so I'll just do my best to try to counsel you through it, so to say, and help you with it. There's always this tension that the church is a family, it is a body, and one of the major weaknesses of the North American church is that we don't actually practice the intention of church well. So like in Romans 12, when Paul says, you know, the church is a body and you belong to each other, like that. I've been talking about this a lot. I have a Bible study just for men at 7 a.m. on Tuesdays down in the community room at the Gent Road building. And we've been talking about that for 4 or 5 weeks. Our producer Jason's in the Bible study. It's probably 4 or 5 weeks that we've been talking about it because it's so revolutionary. When I think of myself not as an attender, I think of myself as a owner and a one who belongs to other people. And so there's a whole conversation we could have another time if we're looking for subjects about mixed messages that we could talk about there. So you're going to see that in the body, or in the Bible, I meant to say. And I would say that often that teaching and that mindset is underplayed. Usually we think about church in a consumer mindset. Do I like the speaker? Do I like the music? Do they have the programs? Is it time convenient? Is the weather good? Like it's amazing, right? So that the average attendance of a committed churchgoer is 1.6 times a month. That's of a committed one.
Yeah.
So there's negative things there, right? That we all need to work on and be a part of. The other side of it is that there are times when God moves you on.
Sure.
And there's reasons that he does that. Sometimes in Revelation, Jesus talks about how his lampstand is on a church, or his presence or blessing is on a church. So sometimes the lampstand of God has been put out. There's sin, there's lack of mission, there's false teaching, there's bad leadership, and there's times when I think godly people have to look and say, we cannot tolerate or will not tolerate this anymore, and they have to leave. Sometimes you move or something like that, and you have to leave, Sometimes there's relational breakdown, and the most gracious thing for you to do is you step aside, and you're trying to prefer a weaker brother or sister who can't do that. And then there's like your kids. So one of the things that we, in fact, I don't know if you guys heard that on air or not, but like right now we have sports camps going on. There was just a bunch of noise in the hallway. One of the things that we did when we started Grace is we said we will give ourselves fully to children and youth.
Yeah.
And part of where that value came from was my childhood. So I hated church. To their credit, there were loving people there. Hear me say that, loving and well-intentioned people. But there was nothing about how our church exercised being a church that made sense to me as a kid. There wasn't a good way for me to learn. There weren't peers that were Christ-centered for me to be involved with. And there wasn't a intentional process of moving me through levels of maturity. And so my Sunday school class when I was a junior in high school was just like my Sunday school class when I was 6 years old. That kind of a thing. And so I hated it. And the sermon was painful, and there was unhealth being taught. Our pastor, however, was loving, and so it was a tension. So when we started Grace, we just said, let's do everything that we can to help parents in their discipleship by doing our best to reach and engage children. And so at Grace Church, there are thousands of children that are part of it. If you ever want to make my day, I love it when children think I'm their friend, because I want to be, and they're like, Pastor Jeff, and we're playing and goofing off in the lobby. I love it when children look at their parents and say, can we please go back to church, because they had fun or they understand something. I love it when teenagers are pushed in their faith, or they can go experience something like a missions trip that they couldn't experience otherwise, or Momentum Youth Conference. I love it when young adults find themselves surrounded by young adults, and they're adventurous and they're fun while being passionate about reaching lost people. And I love it when parents, like this mom who wrote in, who say, I'm actually not sure what to do. You guys help me with it. So like Grace Church, for instance, we're looking to say we take that very, very seriously. Yep. Other churches do too.
Yep.
And what happens then is you wind up in a place where you say, I want that environment for my kids. Okay. Now, when you're there, which is what I heard her saying, and you're at a church that doesn't have that environment, I think you have to ask some questions. So you may even write these down if I'm answering your question. So one, I would ask the question, can I be a part of creating that environment? So can I serve? Can we invest money, invest time, invest effort? Because that environment does not have to look like a slide through the floor in a playland downstairs like it does at Grace Church. That environment, basically anywhere that a kid has a little bit of fun and a lot of acceptance. So can we be a part of creating that environment? A second question would be this. will our church choose to value it? So I know churches that if a child accepts Christ, they don't count it as a salvation. And I take offense to that, frankly. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Well, they'll probably change their mind, and they might. I'm like, what? I didn't say any of that was untrue, but you just really devalued something because we come to Jesus as we are, and if I'm 8 years old, all I can do is come to Jesus as an 8-year-old.
When Jesus describes the type of faith he wants, and it's childlike.
Yeah. So I'm like, I got an issue with that. Will my church support? Like, will the pastor support? Would he get up and say, we're going to try to get a children's ministry going? I want you guys to volunteer. Will they put resources toward it? Because I think one of the things that's important for a church to value children and youth, the whole of the church needs to put resources into it. It creates ownership. Will they allow the facilities to be changed? And then I think, et cetera. And then I think this is a big question. If my child accepted the culture and the teaching and the interpretation of Jesus that's being presented to them, would I want my child to do that? And so, like in my church growing up, well-intentioned people, not jerks, but I like to say we were taught, we would go to church every week and we would be taught another sin. And when I was starting a church, I looked and said, I don't want my children to be taught that. I want them to be taught about the wonder of who Christ is. And through the love and the wonder and the grace and mercy of God, we learn about sin through that lens. We don't learn about God's grace and mercy through the lens of sin. So there was a philosophical difference and ultimately a theological difference where I would have said, I actually don't want my children, I'm going to go home and I'm going to have to tell my children, don't listen to that part. So you have to look at all that, and then what happens is you might look and say, if my church is small and young or trying to turn around and they would embrace all that, then you are wildly helpful. You were probably sent to that body to be a part of that change. If the church is resistant to it and they feel like you are bugging them or angry, or you might look and say, you know what, it may be I'm going to become divisive. Maybe I should go join something that's already moving down the path that I believe that we should go down. That should be prayerful. You should investigate the next church.
Because you don't want to do it again.
You don't want to do it again. Like you really want to. One of the great privileges that I've had is I've raised my children at one church. They've only known one church their whole life. And I'm like, that's a real privilege. The number one reason that young adults do not lose the faith is multi-generational relationships. And so the fact that my kids like know these people up and down, and then like I'm great. Our church has loved my children well, and I'm grateful for that. So you're wrestling with those things.
One of the biblical imageries that pops into my mind as you're explaining this is 1 Corinthians 12 that talks a lot about the body of Christ and how we all need these different parts. And on a very simplistic level, one of the things I hear you saying is if you feel out of place because you happen to be the right elbow and no one else is the right elbow, God might be just calling you to be that person. But if your church is saying, we don't want right elbows here, like we don't want a children's ministry here, but I have kids and I would love to pour into, it's like, okay, now there's a slightly potential different conversation to happen because the gifting or the passions, and I want to be careful even how I say that, but that you bring to the table can't even remotely be engaged. So Jeff, is there anything in particular that how would we go about leaving that church? You know, when this time, if and when it comes up?
Well, this one I'll speak a little bit biblically and then a lot as a guy who has people leave his church once in a while, so it can hurt. So, biblically, the Bible would say if a brother or sister offends you, you who are offended should go to them. And then the Bible would talk about elders. Sometimes it depends on your tradition. Sometimes they're called deacons, but lay leaders, pastoral leaders of the church who are the spiritual leaders. And so I would say number one, you should go to your pastor and voice your concerns and offer to be a part of the solution and see what he says about that. And then
Because he might have been praying.
He might have been praying
for that.
It may be the top of his to-do list, or he might say, it's not important to us, or you can do what you want, but he may not get behind it. So you need to start with like an eyeball to eyeball with that. Secondly, tell your pastor the truth of why you're leaving without being critical. So the truth is, we want something and need something different for our family. We love you, and this isn't the place for us to be. Don't turn it into, God led us somewhere. We're just, don't hyper spiritualize it, and don't make it critical. The problem with this church is, right, leaving. I don't believe you should ever leave a church without a tear in your eye. Like, it should be a very hard decision.
Yeah.
And it should be a very thought through and processed decision. And I can tell you as a pastor, I've had people come to me and say, we're leaving Grace and because here's all the problems. And I've looked at them and I've said, well, why weren't you a part of the solution? I mean, you just gave me an hour-long dissertation about what's wrong. You never came and talked to me about it. And it's that one frustrates me.
Sure.
Okay. I've also had people come to me and say, I'll never forget this one guy. This happened a couple years ago. He came to me and he said, my wife and I are going to go to this other church. And he goes, it's 100% my fault. Okay. He goes, we did not try to get involved. We did not give small groups a real opportunity. And we never got active in serving. So we never attached. So we're going to go over where we have friends because we realize we're actually attached there. And I looked at him. I was like, I love you. We're still friends, obviously. And I'm like, thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
The problem wasn't our assimilation process. The problem was you didn't go to anything, right? So that was helpful to me. I've also had people come to me and say, I'm thinking of one family in particular that came to me and they said, we actually just want something different. And in that particular case, they wanted a church that centered its ministry around homeschooling. And I'm like, well, that's not us, and it's not going to be. And they said, we know, but we really believe that and want that. And I actually helped them to connect with a different church. Okay.
Yep.
Now, here's the most painful thing that happens to me. You can call me a jerk, and I am so used to being called a jerk, it will bounce right off of me. You can tell me the 15 things that are wrong with my church, and the minute you go down that path, you've discredited your argument in my mind, and I probably don't care that much about what you think. I'm just being barely honest right now, mixed messages listeners. The thing that hurts me personally is when you disappear. And I'm like, do they go here? And then what happens is the relationship is unbelievable. Like, do I call them and ask if they go to the church still? I thought we were friends. I mean, sometimes it's years, and you disappear, and I don't know why, and there's no communication. I would rather you tell me off and storm out the door than disappear. Because I don't know if I'm supposed to shepherd you or not, and I don't know what to do with our friendship. It's horrible, and it's horribly painful. And when I see you, at Walmart, I don't know what to say because I don't know the context of our relationship anymore. And it is wildly painful to me personally. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Well, as you said, we've truly helped countless people find other great places to plug in. It's not that you'd be leaving the church. It's how you go about it or why you're going about it.
I met with one family one time. They were real involved. They live probably 20 minutes from the Gent Road building. And he came to me and he said, Jeff, we're going to change churches. I said, okay. I said, how come? He said, my son got really involved with some kids in our community. He's really come alive spiritually, and they go to such and such church, which is it's called Freshwater. It's a very good church in Wadsworth. And he said, we think maybe we should go. And I looked at him and I said, I agree with you. And he looked at me. I said, if something clicked for your kid, go for that because you guys can click anywhere.
Yeah.
And it was a very mature response. It was a solidification of a friendship. And I'm like, I'm cheering for your kid too. And my friend who said that to me actually trusted that.
Right.
He's like, I know, he didn't say this, but what he was saying in essence was, I know that what you would want more than anything is for my kid to follow Jesus. And I'm like, right, Grace Church is not the only place to do that.
Right.
But he communicated, he didn't disappear. And I've told many people, like especially your junior high and high school kids, I'm like, no, you chase your kid. Like, I'm going to play the odds all day long. If my kids are around other Jesus followers, surrounded by other loving adults who love Jesus, I'm going to feed that environment as much as I can. And that might not be at my church, at Grace Church.
Yep.
And so I know that can happen at Grace Church, but kids are kids. Like they click where they click kind of a thing. And I'm like, feed that.
And I want to clarify something you just said. You didn't say, my kid's not clicking here, so we're going to go somewhere else.
Right.
You said, my kid found somewhere they're clicking.
Right.
And so we're going to feed that.
Yeah, anytime you come to
Kids
something.
go through phases.
Yeah, you got to do the hard work of breaking into a relationship.
Right.
That's where I always say, like with a teenager, just short of duct taping them and throw them on a bus, get them to Momentum Youth Conference.
Yeah.
Because they will come back with friends.
Yep.
Right? So you got to do the hard work. But that's right. Like this family that I'm talking about, they did all of that.
Yep.
And their kid clicked and took off spiritually. I'm like, that's the dream.
Yes.
And I'm on your team with that. And because they communicated, it makes it all then make sense. So I would say to this listener, try to be the solution. Be clear about the problem. Don't go in and just point out a problem. Go in and point out a possible solution. Communicate. And if you come to the point, maybe you've done all that already. I don't know, of course, but if you come to the point where you have to go, clearly communicate. I love you, but we are going to go somewhere else. Now, that might mean you move around churches for a number of weeks until you find something. Now, this is what I would say to that when you're quote-unquote church shopping. Put a time limit on it, or you will drift into nothingness. So if you say, we're going to visit 12 churches until we find something that clicks, I'm like, that's great. Then visit 12. If you didn't have a magic moment, then make a decision on where you're going to go. Right? Now, if you go to church 3 and you're like, feels like home, go to the discovery, do the homework. You're talking theoretically, and hopefully you're making kind of a lifetime decision. I know it doesn't work like that, but you know what I mean? So, like, do the homework.
Yep.
And these are people who are, my church family has helped me raise my children. My son's Bible study is at our producer Jason's house with his son. You've taken my kids on mission trip, etc. So do the homework. Like, these people are going to help me make Jesus make sense, and I'm going to embrace that process. So the hard work of breaking in and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to commend our listener. It's a heavy question, and I commend you for taking it so seriously.
Yeah.
And hopefully this all helps a little bit.
Yeah, I echo that. I do hope this is helpful. And it's one of the reasons Jeff and I are actually in multiple networks with other churches and pastors, is to keep those relationships alive. And we couldn't echo enough that there are countless other wonderful churches to run after Jesus and raise yourself spiritually, but also your family as well. So even if we can help with that, especially locally, that's where most of our networks will be strongest. We would love to do that. If you have questions that you'd like us to engage, you can always submit those at bath.gracechurches.org/mixed messages. And if we can help you take any unique next steps, even this conversation, reach out. Let us know. We would love to help navigate those things. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more of it, make sure you subscribe, follow, rate, and review our podcast. And if you're looking for a place to navigate those things and we can be a landing spot for that, we'd love to be. Check us out in person and or online. Thanks for jumping in with us today as we continue to seek God's voice through all the mixed messages around us. We'll see you next time.